Please, let me go." She was tied in the town square, until the cowboy stepped forward and freed her. Chapter 1. The Girl in the Square. The sun burned low over Dustrock, painting the small frontier town in shades of red and gold. Wind carried grit down the wooden street, rattling loose signs and tugging at the hanging lanterns that would soon be lit for the night. The day was ending, but the crowd in the town square wasn't going anywhere. They'd gathered like crows, circling something broken. In the middle of that square, tied to the post where notices and wanted posters usually hung, stood a girl, barefoot, trembling, and covered in dust. A frayed length of rope bound her wrists in front of her, and her hair, once the color of sunlight, hung across her face in tangled strands. The townsfolk whispered as she kept her head low. "Thief," someone muttered. "Liar," said another. "She ain't from here," an older woman spat. "Outsider trouble." The sheriff leaned against his office porch, arms crossed, watching without expression. "Let her sit with shame," he'd said an hour ago. "Maybe next time she won't steal from decent folks." But no one had seen her steal. The accusation had come from old man Tully, the storekeeper, who'd sworn his silver locket was gone after she passed through town. No proof. Just his word, and his money talked louder than her cries. "Please, let me go," she'd begged at first, voice hoarse. But they didn't listen. Dustrock wasn't a forgiving place. Miles away, a lone rider approached from the hills, the sound of hooves slow and steady. He wore a long brown duster, a hat pulled low to shade his eyes, and a look that spoke of too many miles and too few friends. His name was Calder Hayes, though most just called him Hayes, a rancher, ex-soldier, and a man with a reputation for stepping into trouble he didn't start. He'd come to town for supplies, not salvation. But sometimes fate didn't ask permission. As he rode into the square, his horse snorted and slowed. The murmurs reached him before he even dismounted. Then he saw her. A girl, tied like a criminal. Her face half hidden, her dress torn at the shoulder, her wrists raw from the rope. There was no defiance in her, only quiet misery, and something in her posture made his chest tighten. He swung down from the saddle. "What's this about?" A man beside the saloon smirked. "Outsider girl. Tully says she stole from him." Hayes's eyes went to the sheriff. "You got proof?" The sheriff spat tobacco into the dirt. "Proof enough for me. Town don't like thieves." Hayes stepped closer. "And you tie her in the square like an animal?" The sheriff's brow furrowed. "You a lawman now, Hayes?" "No," Hayes said calmly, "but I got eyes. And that rope says more about this town than she does." The crowd muttered. A few men laughed nervously. But the girl, she lifted her head then, just enough for Hayes to see her eyes. Blue, wide, terrified, but not empty. Like someone still holding on to a sliver of pride. "Please," she whispered, barely audible. "I didn't steal. I swear I didn't." Hayes took a slow step forward. "What's your name, miss?" She hesitated. "Lila. Lila Grace." The sheriff barked. "Don't talk to her, Hayes. She's being punished." Hayes ignored him. "Where you from, Lila Grace?" Her lips trembled. "South side of the canyon. My wagon broke 3 days ago. I came to town looking for work. That's all." Hayes turned his gaze to the sheriff again. "You searched her?" "No need. Tully's word's good enough." "That's funny," Hayes said, his voice cooling. "Last time I was here, Tully's word got a ranch hand whipped for something he didn't do. Man near lost his life before they found the truth." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "You done, Hayes." Hayes walked toward the post. A few men stepped aside as he neared. He reached into his coat pocket, drew out a small knife, and with one quick motion, cut the rope binding Lila's wrists. The crowd gasped. "Easy," Hayes said softly, helping her hands down. Her skin was cold to the touch. "You're free now." The sheriff stomped forward. "You got no right to." Hayes turned to him, eyes like steel. "Then arrest me. But you'll need more than Tully's word to do it." For a tense moment, the square held its breath. Then the sheriff swore under his breath and backed away. "Fine. But she's your problem now." Hayes nodded. "She'll manage better than most around here." He took off his coat and draped it around Lila's shoulders. She flinched at first, then looked up at him as if trying to understand why a stranger would help her. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do that?" He gave her a faint smile. "'Cause I've seen good folks get crushed by small towns with small hearts. You don't strike me as a thief." "I'm not," she said, her voice breaking. "I know." He guided her toward his horse. "Come on. Let's get you somewhere warm. I've got a cabin a few miles north." Lila froze. I can't go with you. People will talk." "Let 'em talk," Hayes said, tightening the reins. "They already did enough of that." That night, the wind grew colder. They reached his cabin under a sky full of stars, the kind you only see far from people. Hayes lit the fireplace, handed her a blanket, and gave her water and bread. She sat by the flames, silent for a long while. Finally, she said, "You shouldn't have helped me. They'll think I'm your problem now." Hayes leaned against the wall. "You're nobody's problem. Least of all mine." Her eyes flicked up to his face. "Why do you care?" He looked into the fire. "Once upon a time, someone left me tied, too. Took one person to set me free. Figured I'd pass it on." Silence fell again, comfortable this time. Outside, the desert wind howled. Inside, the flames whispered against the wood. For the first time in days, Lila felt safe enough to breathe. By morning, Dustrock was buzzing. "The cowboy took her," they said. "Hayes. That fool ruined himself over a stray girl." But Hayes didn't care. He saddled his horse again at dawn, ready to ride into town for proof, because deep down, he knew something wasn't right about the accusation. And Lila, standing at his cabin door, watched him go with a strange ache in her heart. He'd saved her without asking anything in return. And that scared her more than the ropes ever had. The girl who stayed. Morning poured gold through the cracks of Hayes's cabin, painting the wooden floor in warm streaks. The scent of coffee filled the small room, mixing with the faint smoke of the dying fire. Lila stirred under the blanket, startled for a moment, until memory came rushing back. The square. The crowd. The rough rope biting her wrists. And the man who'd cut her free. Hayes stood by the table, already dressed, hat on, loading shells into his revolver belt. He looked over as she sat up. "Didn't mean to wake you," he said. His voice was low, almost gentle. "Coffee's on the stove if you want some." She hesitated before whispering, "You're going back to town." "Yeah," he said, tightening the belt. "Something about Tully's story doesn't sit right. I'll get that locket back if it's the last thing I do." Lila's heart clenched. "You don't have to risk yourself for me." Hayes gave a half-smile. "Ma'am, around here, tellin' the truth's already a risk. Might as well do it proper." He reached for his coat and opened the door, but her soft voice stopped him. "Calder." He turned. "Thank you," she said, eyes shining. "No one's ever stood up for me before." He tipped his hat slightly. "Then they've been blind." And with that, he was gone, his horse's hooves fading into the open plain. The town's judgment. By the time Hayes rode into Dustrock, the town square was nearly empty. Only the sheriff and 2 deputies lingered near the saloon. Hayes dismounted, his boots thudding heavy against the boards. "Sheriff," he said, "need a word." The man sighed. "If this is about that girl—" "It is," Hayes interrupted. "You ever find that locket Tully lost?" "Nope. But I trust Tully's word." "That's your mistake." Hayes stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You remember a drifter named Ned Crow passed through last week?" The sheriff frowned. "Sure. Gambler. Stayed one night. Why? Hayes tossed something onto the sheriff's desk, a silver locket, tarnished but intact. Found this behind Tully's shop, wrapped in Crow's old handkerchief. The sheriff blinked. You're sayin'? I'm sayin' your thief's halfway to the border by now, and you tied up an innocent girl for nothin'. The sheriff's face paled. He looked toward the saloon window, where a few townsfolk were already watching. Dustrock loved its gossip, but hated being wrong. Hayes leaned on the counter, his voice low and steady. You'll ride out to that square, tell the town she's cleared, and you'll do it loud. Understand? The sheriff hesitated, then nodded. I'll make it right. Good, Hayes said, turning to leave. Make sure you do. Some things can't be untied once they're done. Ashes and quiet. Back at the cabin, Lila sat near the window, staring out over the open land. The wind moved through the grass like waves, endless and free. She wrapped the blanket tighter around herself, trying not to think about the eyes that had judged her, or the whispers that had called her thief. When Hayes returned, she saw the dust on his coat and the calm in his eyes. Well? She asked softly. He took off his hat, placed it on the table, and looked at her with that same steady kindness. You're cleared. Sheriff set it straight. The locket was found. Wasn't you after all? Lila blinked, tears welling up before she could stop them. They'll never believe it. They will, he said. And if they don't, then they don't matter. Her lip trembled. You risked your name for me. Hayes shrugged. Names heal easier than people. She laughed through her tears, the sound trembling but real. For a long moment they just looked at each other, the wounded girl and the quiet cowboy, two souls who'd both been broken once, now somehow less alone. When the storm came. That evening a summer storm rolled in from the west. Thunder cracked across the plain as rain began to hammer the roof. Hayes secured the horses while Lila lit the fire again, the wind howling through the cracks. When he came back inside, soaked to the bone, she met him with a towel and a shy smile. Guess the desert still knows how to surprise a man, he said, shaking out his hat. She laughed softly. Seems like everything surprises you, Mr. Hayes. He looked at her, really looked at her. Her eyes glowed in the firelight, her hair still tangled from the wind, but there was strength now where there had been fear. I've been called a lot of things, he said quietly, but not surprised. Not in a long time. The storm roared, rattling the shutters. He poured 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. For a while, they sat in silence, listening to the rain pound the roof and the thunder roll away. Finally, she whispered, when you found me yesterday, I thought I'd die there. Not just from shame, but from believing no one in this world could be kind. Hayes turned toward her, his voice rough. Don't let that town decide what you believe. They ain't the whole world. She looked up, eyes searching his. Then what is? He hesitated. Maybe it's this. 2 people sittin' by a fire, trying to be better than what hurt them. The firelight danced on their faces, and Lila felt something warm stir in her chest, something fragile but alive. The morning after. When the storm cleared, Dustrock looked different. The air smelled of rain and earth instead of dust. Lila walked outside the cabin barefoot, feeling the wet grass under her feet. Hayes joined her, holding a small bundle. Found this by your wagon, out near the canyon, he said. Figured you might want it back. Inside the bundle was a small book, her mother's prayer journal. She traced the name on the cover with trembling fingers. I thought it was gone. Things worth keeping have a way of find their way home, he said. She looked up at him, heart swelling. What will you do now? Head back to the ranch. Got fences to mend. Maybe someone to help mend them. She smiled faintly. You offering me work? He grinned. Maybe more than that, if you stay long enough. Her breath caught. Calder. He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You don't owe me nothin', Lila Grace. But if you're tired of runnin' from the world, I got room at my table, and a heart that could use a reason to stay put. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they were soft, full of light instead of pain. I've never had a place to belong, she whispered. You do now. He took her hand, rough palm against her small trembling fingers, and the wind blew across the plains carrying the scent of rain and new beginnings. Epilogue. Weeks passed. Dustrock forgot its gossip soon enough. A new scandal always waited around the corner. But sometimes, when the townsfolk saw the tall cowboy riding with a golden-haired woman beside him, they'd lower their heads in quiet shame. At Hayes's ranch, laughter began to fill the empty rooms again. Lila cooked by the window while he mended tools outside. In the evenings, they'd sit on the porch, her head resting against his shoulder, the world finally still. One night, as the sunset bled across the horizon, she whispered, "You never asked me what I was praying for that day in the square." He looked down at her. "What were you praying for?" She smiled softly. "Someone who'd see me before the ropes did." Hayes's thumb brushed her hand. "Reckon you got your prayer answered." "And you?" she asked. "What did you wish for?" He smiled, eyes on the fading light. "Peace. And maybe a reason to keep riding home." The wind carried their laughter across the open land, and somewhere beyond the hills, the town of Dustrock slept, unaware that, for two lost souls, love had finally found its way home.